Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on whether you're watching us live or you're watching a recording, and of course, also depending on the time zone in which you are in. My name is Tito de Moraes, and together with Sonia Seixas and Luís Fernandes, we're the organizers of the second Global Stop Cyberbullying Telesummit that started on October 1st and will go on until October 31st. This is already the 32nd session that we are holding. There are still some additional three sessions until the 31st. And as usual, we'll be talking about cyberbullying. I'm based in Portugal. I'm talking to you from Rio Tinto, which is a small municipality around the second largest city of Portugal named Porto. And feel free to let us know where you are following us from. We're broadcasting to Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope. So feel free to use the comments, not only to tell us good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, but also to leave your comments, letting us know where you are following us from. Just a note, together with Sonia Seixas and Luís Fernandes, we were the authors of this book, Cyberbullying, a Guide for Parents and Educators, which was published in Portugal in April 2016. Sonia and Luís had written another book previously named Plano Bullying, How to Erase Bullying from School. And this is more directed at schools, teachers, and the educational community at large. But they also wrote a book for children, Say No to Bullying, Don't Let Them Hurt You. This is a book targeting youth and children. And we also wrote a chapter for a book published by the Council of Europe named Bullying, Perspectives, Practices, and Insight, which was authored by Janice Richardson, who was a guest a couple of weeks ago, Elizabeth Milovidov, who was also a guest on the first edition, so that's last year, and Roger Blemeyer, who we haven't had yet the pleasure to meet. And also, I think that our guest today also wrote a book for this a chapter for this book. So, meanwhile, Sonia has joined us. Hi, Sonia.
Hi,
So,
Tito.
where are you?
I'm, as usual, in Santarém, in the middle of Portugal, with a nice weather
Yes.
today.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. Here it's
here I
also
am. Yeah, to hear
here the sun is
today's one.
also shining and not raining as much as it
Not
was
raining.
yesterday. Yep.
Yes.
So today we have a guest from Australia. That's Donna Cross. She's at the Telethon Kids Institute, and she's coming to talk with us on genuine student engagement in school cyberbullying education. And I think she's in Perth, but let's ask her. Hi, Donna, welcome. And thanks for having accepted our
My,
invitation to be part of this.
my pleasure, Tito, and thank you to you and to Sonia. I'm in Perth, which is in the southern hemisphere in Australia on the west coast. So it's about 9 o'clock at night here.
Okay. So opposite sides of the world, more or less.
Yes.
Okay. Donna, we usually start by asking our guests, instead of reading their bios, ask them to, tell us who they are, what's their background. Can you tell us who Donna Cross is?
Well, Donna Cross is a mum, but in my work time, I work as a professor at the University of Western Australia, and I also am a senior leader in the institute called the Telethon Kids Institute, which is a child health and education research institute. And I love playing tennis and walking.
Okay. I haven't been much walking, and I need to, because I stopped smoking and I put up 20 kilos. So I need to walk more than I do currently.
Yes. Well, our part of the world is
another
quite
question.
liberated.
Okay. Another question that we also ask is, how did you got involved with the topic of the importance of listening to children and giving them a voice, and also with cyberbullying? Was there some trigger that made you interested in the subject?
Very much so, Tito. We were looking at some data that I'm going to show the slide in here, where we identified that children were not talking to adults about issues related to bullying more broadly. And when we talked to them about why, they spent a fair bit of time explaining all of the things that we do wrong. And I thought, well, if, gosh, we're getting that so wrong, what else are we getting wrong in terms of our actions that we do to support children? So it really inspired us, and that was about 15 years ago when we first saw cyberbullying happening amongst children.
Okay. Well, I have put bring up the presentation, so feel free to start your presentation. We look forward to hear it. I don't know if Sonia has any question before Donna starts.
I don't have a question, but I want to say that it's a very clever question. If it's about me, why do it without me? So I think it's a question that most of us, investigators, professors, parents, should reflect. It's so true. If it's about them, we should do and involve them since the start. So I just want to hear you. Thank you, Donna, for that question.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And it's really my privilege and pleasure to talk with everyone tonight and to share some of the work that we've been doing. As I mentioned, nearly 15 years worth of work that we have focused on cyberbullying. When we first saw children in one of our bullying-related research projects telling us that they were being bullied through their mobile phone, which at the time we thought, gosh, that's interesting. Of course, now it's very obvious. So involving the consumer, whoever they are, whether it's children or adults, is obviously a critical element of all of the work that we do to make sure that whatever we're creating is relevant and appropriate. So I'd like to talk to you about some ideas that we have generated over those 15 years. I'd like to talk you through a whole series of examples of things that we've learned, what not to do, as well as what to do that we've found to be successful with the children and schools and families that we've worked with over time. But before I do, I guess I just wanted to explain Australia. Most people kind of don't look south too much, and when they do, don't realise how big we are relative to other parts of the world. And this diagram, although a bit fuzzy, gives you a really strong understanding of how large our country is, and if we are going to engage users, how much work we have to do to get to them and to enable them to speak. And I come from here, down on the west coast in Perth. And just in case you weren't sure whether you should visit Australia, I thought I'd include one picture just so that you know that our beaches are nearly as beautiful as they are in Portugal, and welcome you here to my country. Now, in my country, before we begin any presentation, we acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of Australia. the Aboriginal people, and where I am located is the country of the Noongar people of the Whadjuk Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Now, all of us know that we're pretty old, no matter what age you are online. If you are older than 14, you probably are really struggling with a lot of things related to technology. And that digital divide becomes wider and wider based on the age that you are. So I wonder, of these symbols that could well have been sent to you by somebody under 14 who does know what they mean, if you could translate them. And I'll give you a moment to kind of reflect on each of them. The last one might be interesting. It might be easy for you to identify. Of course, that's kissing. But some of the others are a bit tricky. So let me just translate for you. And maybe you've seen other interpretations of many of these symbols. But as older people, we need to work very closely with young people who are engaging in these environments, so that we make sure that we're making sense of the content that they're seeing, and that we can be helpful to them and provide them with the appropriate level of support. Now, the way that I'd like to structure my presentation tonight is to talk through three areas. I'd like to argue first that we need a really authentic and representative engagement of children and young people's voice, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. But it needs to be genuine, and you know, sometimes we just take control of this, and my cartoon at the bottom there is really just a principal saying, I just want this out of here, without maybe any deep understanding of why it's there in the first place. And so I'd like to talk about ways that you can try and engage young people and obviously other users of a school environment to determine that. And I'd like to maybe talk about the different roles that children and young people can have as authentic partners in this process. It might be easy just to think of them as leaders. It might be easy just to think of them as co-developers or co-designers of content. But I'd like to argue there are many other things that we could be engaging young people in as part of that process. And then I'm going to run through a few case studies just so you can see how we operationalised, really put into place some of those activities as we go. And I called this "A goal without a plan is just a wish," because my goal is in less than an hour, in 40 minutes or so, allowing time for questions, that I will have given you a strong sense of each of these three components. I mentioned when Tito asked me what motivated us to get involved with looking at student voice, and these were some data that we collected in 2009. And there's a lot of information on here. I'll break it up for you in just a moment. But effectively what we were doing is we were asking students, and these were students aged from 10 years of age through to 14 years of age. And we asked them if they were having difficulties at school, and that included cyberbullying as one of the examples. How often, when they were experiencing difficulties, did they seek help from adults? So these were just children who said that they were experiencing difficulties. So within that cohort of children, we said, did you ask an adult for help? And they said yes or no. And then amongst those who said yes, we then asked them, did it get better? Or did it stay the same? Or did it get worse? And as you can see on this diagram, the red says, the red bar graph is suggesting that it got better. So for boys in Australia, when they spoke to an adult, and you can see by the blue bar graph, that I'm just waving my cursor over here at the moment, that very few boys ask help from adults in the first place, so fewer than 15%. Girls, much more likely to ask adults for help. But when we ask girls also if it got better, you can see that fewer than half, as a result of that interaction from adults, found it helpful. And we thought this was pretty distressing, that of those few children or young people that are going to adults for help, and that includes parents as well as teachers, our question was, what are we doing so badly that young people are very likely going to stop coming to us, or certainly a significant percentage of them, especially if you're a boy, and what could we do differently and do better? And it was this research that led us to focus on keeping in touch, is what we called the study. But how do we help children keep in touch? with adults, and how do we help adults to keep in touch with children. And we applied this content in particular to cyberbullying, and I'd like to talk about that work as we go through. But before I do that, this jargon that we're using, what is student voice? I use that terminology, but it's probably a bit more than just children rushing up to a teacher and telling them about things that are going on in their school environment. And I'd like to argue, and at least the context that I'll present today, is that voice is any method, any technique that you use, and I'm going to show you quite a number that we've used, that allows or enables a child or a young person to be really actively involved in the decision-making process, regardless of the form that it takes. So in thinking about that, I'd like you to reflect for a moment. I know that there are many people who are joining us this evening, my time, daytime, your time, who have no doubt engaged young people and tried to engage their voice in the work that you've done. And I ask you to reflect first, how does your work or the school that you're working in really enable and encourage student voice? What are the actions that you take? Which children are you involving in that process? In our research, we found that many schools were only involving those students who were in leadership positions, and we know that that presents an enormous bias to how children are functioning and what their needs are if we only talk to those children who are already leaders and who perhaps have really good self-confidence. So having a representative sample of students is obviously critical. And I'd also ask you to reflect on how your school or the work that you're doing with young people enable and encourage student leadership. So I'm going to separate these two issues as I reflect on how we focus on this in a cyberbullying context today. That there's one level is just making sure that we are listening to young people and asking for their input and advice and doing it in a very systematic way. And the second part is that we also not only listen, but enable them to lead and the actions that we can take, particularly in a cyber context. So perhaps we don't have a playground that looks like the one that I'm showing here, where we're not paying any attention to how young people might see it, but instead just suggesting that they follow it through. So if you don't agree that we maybe need to get young people involved and engaged and leading, perhaps just at the most superficial level, one of the most important reasons that we should do this is just to build our knowledge. So we need to know, even if we don't do anything about it, we need to know what children and young people are doing with technology, and we need to do it regularly. Technology is so amazing. We know the apps and software are changing. We know the devices are changing. We know young people's behaviour is changing, and it changes very regularly. So we need to have mechanisms that we're regularly staying in touch. So if we're a parent, we'd be sitting having regular conversations with our children, understanding where they're going, asking them to show us where they're spending time online, asking them to, if you can play and engage with some of the things that they're doing. But in a school environment, obviously using surveys, simple surveys in a classroom, obviously through their mobile phones or through technology devices that they enjoy using graffiti walls, either online or physical graffiti walls, so butcher's paper, that they can add ideas to as they walk by, getting them to create media like 1-minute videos that describe the things that they love most about the places that they go, so that we understand their positive experiences as well as maybe some of the negative experiences they're having. So we have a really balanced view of how young people are engaging with technology. Our research, and I know others elsewhere, are very strongly of the view that if you shut out parents and really ban children from their access to technology, you shut down their learning and you exclude parents and families and other adults from really understanding what they can be doing. And the second element of building knowledge that we think is really important is just that understanding of what are all the devices that young people are using, how do they function, so that we understand that, having a look at the apps on a regular basis and how these are used by students. I'm not going to feature this tonight in my presentation, but my team, led by Bette Nugent, has developed an amazing app that has brought together all of the information that parents have indicated to us is so important. and created an app that's now available in both iOS and Android format that is called Beacon. And Beacon's job is to provide tailored information to constantly build the knowledge of all adults that are interacting with young people. I wanted to mention also that if at any time you have questions that you'd like to ask of me, please feel free to interrupt. I'll be very happy to comment as we go. So what does authentic student voice look like?
Yes, I have one regarding, is it available?
Yes, Tito, very good
question. Is the app available from the Teleton?
It probably is only available in the Australian App Store and Google App Store.
Okay.
I will send you the information that we have about our app and how the content that we have could be reached, Tito. So I'll pass that on after this presentation, if that would be okay. So going back to what are the levels of engagement that we can have with young people? And I'll go through this quickly. But the lowest level that you think of, sort of the bottom of the ladder, is adults who have complete authority and use young people or children's ideas and voices for their own gain. So just manipulating young people and maybe putting words into their mouths, not representing young people's views at all. And then as you work slowly up the ladder, I promise I won't go through all 8, but around the middle, perhaps the ways that we'd be engaging young people would be to ask their advice on projects that are being designed and run by adults and just receiving feedback. And probably all of us have engaged in that kind of youth voice in the work that we're doing. And I guess as a result of my presentation tonight, I'd like to push you all up the ladder a bit more, and ideally reaching kind of that top level where young people have the ideas and decide on how they'll be implemented, and the adults trust young people's leadership and engage and promote that. We might not be able to do that all the time, but we must be providing opportunities for young people to be able to experience that sense of agency and control. And of course, we benefit by observing that as well. So it's a win-win situation for everyone. In the work that we've been doing, this is a summit that we ran. We called the Cyber Friendly Student Summit Workshop. And many young people participated. These are some grade 9 students, but many of them made comments like this one, that all the adults wanted our opinion and help. I was really happy to find out how useful we were and that we actually made a difference. And surprisingly, comments like this are ones that we see quite regularly. I'm sure you see it as well, in terms of young people really being grateful for the opportunity and to be able to see that they were being listened to and that their advice is being acted on. Ultimately, that would be our goal. This is a horrible slide, and I just wanted to show you the extent of the cyber research that we've been doing, where we've been testing the engagement of young people. Every one of these bubbles represents a research project that we've been running since 2006. You can see the code down the bottom. The pink bubbles represent those that we've completed. The yellow are our current projects, and the blue are ones we've written applications for. I show you this because I want to reflect that in all of the activities we do, whether it's discovery, where we're just trying to find out what on earth is going on, what is happening with Fortnite and gaming, what do we know about the ways that young people are engaging in gambling online, where are young people going that are creating vulnerabilities around sharing of images, the kind of formative, really basic introductory understandings. And there is some amazing work that's going on in that area. We also need to deeply understand how we build the capacity of adults, parents, and teachers to accept and engage and know the ways that they can support young people in this environment. So it's really important that as we look at this continuum of research, that we have research about capacity building. We also need to make sure that the research we're doing is being translated and is getting into the hands of people who need it most, and getting into hands in very practical, meaningful ways, which I hope I can do today, your time. We also need to influence policy and practice. If we really want change, we need governments to join us. So we need the right kinds of advocacy angles. So we need research. We need young people's voices, again, helping us to understand, to advocate for us, to give us that additional support and relevancy in the work that we are pursuing. And ultimately, we want to influence practice. We want to prepare guidelines that are guidelines informed with young people's and children's voices, as well as obviously the adults and others that are contributing to that. So the 4 projects that I'd like to give you some very practical examples tonight that we've worked through were 4 of those bubbles in that previous diagram that I showed you. These projects are temporal, they are a chronology of work that we've done, and I'm going to work through each of these to show you how we engage young people and what we found to be successful and not so successful as part of that process. Before I'll just pause again, just in case there are any questions that anyone might have. So the first of the projects that I'd like to talk...
Today I'm forgetting to unmute myself. I have no questions, but I am impressed with the amount of projects that you have running. They're really impressive.
Thank you very much, Tito. I have an amazing team. There are nearly 40 researchers that work specifically within the team that I am associated with, and they're really the ones that are doing the work. Tito, I'm just lucky enough to be able to talk about it. So the first of these 4 projects is what we've called cyber-friendly schools. And I perhaps wonder if you could just focus on the names that we've given these projects. We come from a very strengths-based, positive focus that we want schools to be cyber-friendly. We don't want schools that are only about blocking and banning. We want everyone to be cyber-strong. We want staff, we want students, we want parents, and we want them to be savvy. We want them to understand the best ways to engage and benefit from that. So a keen focus that we have certainly observed is that young people want to take a positive view here, and they're more likely to trust us as we engage with them if we're not seen to be just trying to take away their technology, but in fact showing them how to use it more effectively and more safely with a harm minimisation approach. So the first of these projects, just very quickly so that you know that these are large, robust studies that we've used. This is a whole school project, hence it takes a school to make a difference, in fact takes the whole community. This project focused just on a whole school. It was a randomised controlled trial, so gold standard, 35 schools, over 3,000 children, their parents and teachers. We asked and engaged young people as both a voice and a leader through this project. Every piece of work that I talk to you tonight, I can send a publication that goes with it, or you'll see this presentation, no doubt, online, made available to you afterwards, so you can see the details of this study. But I'd like to talk about what we did to engage young people as part of that process. So most importantly, we needed to bring them together really early. So as we were setting the research objectives for this study, we asked young people to tell us what we should have been investigating. So the research questions were framed from a young person's perspective. What did they think was important for us to research to improve the school environment for them? We brought together a very large group of students. We were very ambitious. We ran a summit that had over 200 young people together for, in the first instance, a day. Over that day, we had many young people who were speakers. In 2 separate rooms, we had the teachers who brought the students to the summit, and we also had parents. The students at the summit represented 40 different schools, and there were 2 or 3 students from each of those schools that attended, so that they had a group of champions or ambassadors that would then go back into their own school environment. So they had many others that they could reflect on. Over the day, we asked them a whole series of questions. You can imagine the sorts that we were interested in. We wanted to know what they loved about the online environment, what they saw was difficult, what they observed other young people at the summit and themselves and their friends experience in online environments, and most importantly, what did they think we needed to do about it. This picture that you see here was the close of the summit. It's a giant jigsaw. You can almost see the outline of the jigsaw there. And each table, and you can see there were quite a number of tables given the 200 young people there, so there are 20 pieces to this jigsaw, 10 people at a table. At the end of the day, the young people made a pledge about what they would do when they go back to their school environment. And then they signed their pledge piece of the jigsaw and put together the jigsaw symbolically at the end of the day with their declaration of what they thought needed to happen in school environments. And that's this white sheet that you see in the middle of the picture here. And each of the dot points here was a summary of what the young people decided over the day was critical to addressing cyberbullying within a school environment. They then took that pledge back to each of their schools, and I'll show you in a minute the sorts of activities that they did to draw from the school community, their own school communities, what they thought were important. So we trained them first to be researchers effectively, and then they went back into their schools and helped collect data for us. When they got back to their schools, they helped us determine what was the key content that they thought was critical, and they used 5 C's here to help us: context, contacts, confidentiality, conduct, and content. And these 5 areas were things that they felt that they needed to know more about, but also that the adults who cared for them needed to know more about it. Context being the sorts of places that they were experiencing in online environments. Contacts, obviously, who they're meeting and the sorts of engagements, the ways they socialise within that environment, etiquette being an example. Confidentiality was obviously about privacy and digital privacy and ways to maintain that. Conduct was their own rights and responsibilities in the environment and the sorts of actions that they should be taking, how they should be communicating and behaving. And last but not least, the kinds of content that they should be uploading, viewing, downloading, and obviously reporting in the cases of items that were different. And this was incredibly valuable to us because there seemed like there was so much content that we should be addressing that was very useful to have these young people to tell us what they thought was most relevant to the ages of students who were participating in this study, who were secondary school students, primarily grade 9. So in Australia, that's 13, 14 and 15-year-olds who contributed to this research. Here's a picture of quite a number of them who were at this summit. In addition to identifying the key content, they also created how we would deliver that content to young people. They created a whole series of multimedia themselves, a whole variety of online videos that they thought captured the essence of key issues that they thought were important. They helped us develop a website. I'm going to show you some of the pages in a moment. They helped us design what their role should be in the school as cyber leaders. So in their researcher leader role, when they went back into the school, they also needed support to understand how they could continue to facilitate that role. They also contributed to how they thought teachers should teach the curriculum and intervention that they had going on. This was really important because they said to us that teachers don't know enough, and we don't really trust that they'll be able to respond to the ways that we would like to understand this content. So we would like the classroom, I'm speaking from young people, they would like the classroom activities to be more self-directed, with teachers facilitating the process rather than teaching in maybe the more traditional sense. We also provided resources to make sure that there was a whole school approach, that there were policies, parents were being engaged, that the social climate, the physical environment, all those components that typically make up a comprehensive health promoting schools approach were also addressed and supported by these young people and the messaging that they suggested, as well as lots of other resources that you can see listed there. Now the website, they named it, they designed the elements that were within it. This is the home page that young people logged into and then could choose a whole variety of places that they would go. I'm just showing you 2 pages in the website. You can see this website looks quite different. They were designing things like opportunities for them to speak about how they're feeling right at the time that they're using the website. And you can see something I'm circling down here in the right-hand corner called Have Your Shout. They had podcasts that they were producing up here. Obviously, this program is getting older now. Podcasts aren't used as much. they wanted videos embedded all the time, that they much preferred viewing than reading, and then lots of interactive activities that they were doing that were personalising content for them. So they were very particular about the advice that they were providing to us. As a result of us then running a randomised controlled trial over 3 years, where we had these champions, cyber leaders, who first helped us design the intervention, then helped us implement it. So when we then put the program into the schools, we had at least 3 champions who advocated, reminded teachers of the opportunity that these resources provided, and ran workshops for teachers, ran workshops for parents, and I'll show you what that looks like later. And we have a resource that's available free that anyone can use. That definitely is available worldwide. But what we found most interesting is, what did we do wrong first? What could we have done better? We focused so much on listening to young people. We didn't listen enough to teachers. And the teachers said to us that they weren't quite ready for how motivated the cyber leaders were to come back into the school. And even though we provided them with self-directed resources that young people could effectively teach themselves, with teachers facilitating and engaging with the young people, teachers were not comfortable teaching in that mode. And they really felt that we failed in providing more effective capacity building for teachers. I remember that the timing of this study is, nearly 8 years ago now, and it was very early days for adults generally to understand this. So our most important learning here was to make sure that in all that we were doing to engage young people's voices, that we spent more time preparing teachers for this sense of empowerment and supporting them in the longer term. We also found that the cyber leaders within the school that really provided a focus for the efforts that were going on were really critical, and obviously their support was important as well. Our ambassadors often said that they would go to the lead teachers, and particularly the teachers we also took to the summit, and those teachers were less enthusiastic than the students were, and often just quelled their enthusiasm rather than enriching and encouraging it. It was perhaps in their minds creating too much work for them. However, we learnt a lot about the sorts of capacity building that we should be providing for staff, and I'll talk to that in just a moment, and also what additional capacity building we needed to provide for student leaders. I'm just pausing there just in case there are any questions about that first study, cyber-friendly schools.
No questions so far, but let me remind our viewers that we are broadcasting to Facebook, YouTube, and Periscope, and they should feel free to comment and make suggestions and ask questions, and we'll bring those comments, questions, and suggestions into the screen. So use the comment field to participate.
And we can ask the questions.
Sounds great.
At the end,
I'm not.
Sure.
Thank you, Tito and Sonia. Please don't feel any pressure to ask questions. I just didn't want to rush on in case anyone had anything they wanted to ask.
Yep.
So the next project that I'd like to talk about, I mentioned I was going to talk about 4 projects. After we completed the Cyber Friendly Schools project, we realised we needed to strengthen schools. Schools weren't quite ready for these cyber leaders and for the cyber research that we did. So instead of maybe just rejecting schools, forgive my cartoon, rejecting technology in schools, we wanted schools to embrace technology and to use it in a really positive way. So we, in the same way that we were engaging young people's voices for cyber-friendly schools, we asked them what they thought schools needed to do to improve the ways that they engage with young people and parents. And we also asked parents and teachers. We did a much better job this time in trying to build that overall capacity. So Cyber Strong Schools was a resource that was designed specifically for school staff, not just teachers, but also other school staff, coaches, maybe staff who were coming into the school as relief teachers to replace teachers who were unwell, for visiting people coming to the school who may want to understand what the school's policies and actions are. And also there were elements within there to support parents' knowledge and capacity. And there were 5 broad modules that were developed. Those that helped with teaching and learning, so primarily directed at school teachers. There was a section on just thinking through policy and cyber-related policy. Schools were still struggling with writing policy that was proactive and that talked about what they wanted schools to do versus just telling schools what they telling members of the school what they can't do with technology. We found that teachers were making a number of mistakes in the ways that they were using technology. They were perhaps teaching through Facebook and not realizing that, that they were not using their privacy settings effectively when they were doing that. We found that teachers who maybe were sent an image that was an inappropriate image that was moving around the school, some picture that somebody had uploaded, was saving it on their own device overnight, when perhaps it might have been an image of that in Australia, for example, would be illegal, of a child in some sexual related behaviour. So we felt that there was a real need to help teachers to understand their own professional conduct and how to use technology to protect students, but also to protect themselves. They needed to improve their personal knowledge. They just didn't know enough, and they too were using devices and making mistakes. We often use the phrase, maybe it's an Australian phrase, but there were many traps for old players, and addressing that was critical. And we also added this module on how to support cyber leaders within the school environment. Now, the website that was built, you'll see in a moment, was sadly lacking in dynamism, but what it lacked in images, it maintained in content, and we had wonderful feedback about the content that we provided. So in the teaching and learning section of the website, which as you can see looks a bit dry, there was a lot of really important content that, again, teachers could access, that they had told us that they needed. Videos that were created by students, you can see over here in the module navigation, student videos, so they had input, and of course they could choose resources based on links that were built into the website. In the policy section, we talked a lot about the policies that were governments, country level policies, state level policies. You would know what that structures it looks like in your own country. As well as how to link their own policies back to those to make sure that they were addressing what critically needed to happen within a school environment to protect all members of the school community and to ensure that that issues are addressed early and often and before they escalate. The personal knowledge section of the website taught them things like setting up a Google alert, for example, to be aware of new content about themselves that might be going up online, how to search to find out what's already up online about themselves, but using search engines, as you can see here, that are not your typical search engines, to find out what kinds of digital issues you're sharing that you may or may not know are available to the wider public. And of course, in the section around professional conduct, we created a whole series of scenarios or stories that were drawn from real life stories that we had observed within the schools we were working in. We described the scenario, and what you're not seeing on the screen is we then talked through how that particular situation could have been prevented, what would have been an early intervention action that could have been taken in this particular situation, or if it got really serious, what are the actions that a teacher could take to ensure that everyone involved was as safe as they could be. This Cyber Strong website was developed. It took us nearly 18 months to create the website, and then of course we tested it and had tremendous insight into the pieces that teachers use most, obviously just through the web metrics that we were collecting. And we've rolled that content forward in many of those little dots that you saw in the projects that we've since running. But it was so critical, and I mentioned this and reinforce it strongly, that schools must be ready. If we are going to engage young people's voices, we need to make sure that adults are not only working to engage, but also feel capable and positive about the ways that we can engage with young people overall. I mentioned that one part of this website also focused on student leaders, and it's that part that we continue to develop on and built the capacity of young people. So the third of the 4 projects that I will be talking about with you this evening, or during the day, your time, sorry, it's very dark outside my window here, is how we built the cyber capacity of student leaders. So how do we make them feel like they were doing a really important job? Well, most importantly was how schools selected cyber leaders, and it was probably our greatest learning. I've already suggested to you that just using the current leaders or leadership structure for students within a school was not the most effective, not only in terms of drawing content out of the student community, but also because those young people were not always the most charismatic students within the school. And they also weren't necessarily the students who really understood online environments. So we wanted, forgive the term, the technology kids. We wanted young people who loved technology and wanted to share their skills, and who were charismatic enough that students would listen to them and follow them. So you can see my first point there about socially credible leaders. They needed to be young people who others would listen to and follow. And so we asked schools to ask students to nominate through an anonymous process who they thought should be the cyber strong student leaders within their school. And in the resources that I'm going to show you in a moment, we provide a whole series of examples of the ways that schools can do that. We also have content in the resources I'll show you that help teachers to prepare students for that role. So we can't automatically just put them in that role. We need to help them understand what it means to be a leader, and particularly a service leader. We need to help them understand the kinds of resources that are available that they can use that are in the school and elsewhere. And we also need to help them to know how to help other students, because in their role as leaders, and particularly as they start engaging in activities across the school, they very likely will have other students coming to them when they have difficulties. And so these leaders needed to be very sensitive and have some very basic skills to help these young people get greater help. I mentioned something there called LATE, and this is a model that if you have time or if anyone's interested, these were 4 key things that both teachers and students in the school thought were critical in having conversations with any young person who's experiencing difficulties. We also help these leaders develop their presentation skills. They're already pretty good, but sometimes they're presenting, some of the content needed to be checked by teachers before they were presenting to others. So it was important that we had a process that we could develop those skills in young people. And we also needed to develop their skills in implementation, recognising what their strengths are, what the team that they had, that there was a team of leaders, not just one, who took on this role, and how they could use and exploit their skills well. So it was a really terrific experience for young people as up-and-coming emerging leaders, but all in the context of cyber issues. And interestingly, in the schools where we implemented this, the schools in future years decided to create a cyber leader role in the head leadership team within the school. So I don't know the structures in the countries that you work in, but perhaps in your schools you might have a senior student body, and that senior student body might be leaders who are selected for certain tasks, and those tasks might be leading sports or leading learning activities for students or leading social activities. They now, in many of the schools in Australia, have a cyber leader as part of that overall leadership team, in addition to this committee of leaders in the wider environment. We've produced a series of handbooks. These are all online, they're free. This is the handbook that is useful for the leaders themselves, so that they have ideas and can work through it, refer back to it as they need to. Very simple booklet, sending them to other resources if they need to. And we also developed one for staff. So we needed to make sure that we were even in our distribution of content, that we were building the capacity of staff while at the same time building the capacity of leaders, and that we're giving staff as many ideas as possible so that students could be successful in this role in the wider school environment. So there are a whole series of stages that are described within these booklets, the things you need to do to pre-plan for this to occur, how you select the team, how you prepare them for action, what kinds of issues and activities they might select as priorities within their school environment, and then what you can do to really keep that, that support structure going so that these young people feel fully engaged. Interestingly, the first time we ran this, the students who were the cyber leaders, the inaugural cyber leaders, the first group that we trained, we asked them to hand over their role in the last part of the school year. And many of them didn't want to do that. They wanted to continue into the years that followed. That they found it so engaging and empowering as part of that process. And we thought that was a really interesting outcome. We were pleased that the majority of children felt that way. The sorts of activities that the cyber leaders led within the school environment were creating newsletter items for the school, daily alerts to maybe something new that's occurring. Perhaps the TikTok self-harming situation that I no doubt everybody online would be aware of would be an example of something that the cyber leaders would take on board and maybe send an alert out to parents with teacher support to let them know about what has occurred on a regular basis and in a very prompt way. They created lots of media. They helped with assembly, by assemblies in Australia. That's when the whole school comes together and where there are presentations back and discussions with students. They helped at parent nights. They ran parent nights beautifully, in fact. And in fact, more parents came because young people were presenting than when adults presented, which we thought was quite interesting. They presented to staff and built staff skills. They helped alert staff to things that were going on in the school environment that staff weren't aware of, perhaps new software that young people were using, new apps that staff were not yet aware of, or even how to use those apps for staff that wanted to know so that they could be helpful. They also helped train younger students. They were very trusted messengers. Younger children look up to older children, and particularly in cyber environments, so incredibly helpful in mentoring and driving that content. And last but not least, were really helpful in reporting on the things that were going on, reporting to the school board or governance structure as part of that process. So what do we learn as a result of doing that work? In addition to how to do it, we learned that we really needed to encourage schools to support and appreciate the student leaders. The leaders wanted badges. They wanted something they could wear that signalled that they were cyber leaders, so very proud of their role. They wanted acknowledgement in public audiences. They really wanted an official title and one that they could create themselves. And you may think of, cyber leader might not be the appropriate title in your community, but some way of acknowledging officially what they were doing. They wanted to be able to have an official promotion of their work through communication channels. They really wanted a presence within the school environment with that regular support and interaction. And I'm nearly done. I'll be very quick. The last of the 4 projects to showcase is the one that's most recent in terms of its completion. We have a whole series running at the moment. But this one obviously built on all of the 3 projects that we've talked about so far about how do we make kids a little smarter in this environment and involving young people in the sorts of things that they thought that they needed most. What were the mistakes they were making in online environments? Again, forgive my image, but a black eye from a bad experience in using their mobile phone. So we decided to focus, at the time of this research, sexting certainly in Australia was new, and young people using their phones regularly for image sharing, uploading a lot. I know that that's still the case and it's increased, but at this time it was still quite new. And so we wanted to help young people make better decisions about their image sharing. They had told us that this was something that they thought was a weakness and that there were things that they could do to help themselves. There were lots of stages in this project. Again, we spent, as you can see by the red, within each of these stages, these were very important parts where we engaged young people's voices at the start to make sure that the sexting issues that we were identifying were ones that they thought were critical. We then asked a lot of children about that issue and much more broadly than our summit. We then followed up to say, well, here's what we've built. What do you think? Are we on the right track? And of course, then we ran the study and asked young people to help us to disseminate those findings. This summit was a little smaller because we wanted to draw more specific content out. What we did learn from our summits is that 200, while we get a lot of information, we're not able to dig deep enough. So in this summit, we used a very different technique called design thinking. And for those of you who have worked in this area of app building, you would know design thinking perhaps very well. It's a series of divergent and convergent thinking. I call them the double diamonds, asking young people to think broadly about an issue, then pull it into focus, think broadly again about that focus area, and come up with some very key examples. We set them a problem, and the problem was that young people needed something to help them pause, to take a breath before they sent an image. That they said that young people send images way too fast, that they get excited, they're in love, they're angry, whatever the emotion, they send images way too fast before they've thought about it. So their job, and you can see some photographs down the bottom here, was they needed to build an app. They were only allowed to build the app on butcher's paper, so on big sheets of paper. They created what each screen on the app would look like, and then they had to present their app back to us as though they were a phone with each of the screens and how the app would work. And again, there were 10 groups. They were given a very clear task and they were given 2 days to design this app. And of course, designing the app was really interesting, but the content that they were generating as they were thinking about the app was critically what we were after as well in getting that idea. So then after they had built their app, they had to stand up and present to a panel, and our panel had some technology experts in it. Our panel had other young people in it, and the panel voted on which app was the best. And this was the winning team as they presented. You'll notice they're all wearing T-shirts. You probably noticed through all of my images, the students were given T-shirts. We wanted there to be equality in the room, that everybody looked the same, that nobody had fancy school uniforms compared to others. So hence these awful black T-shirts. And as these young people performed their app, so they were judged of the quality, the technical quality of their app. And then we decided, based on that, which team would win. And we had a lovely prize of some technology and other things that they received. But we then had a blueprint to build an app, and we had a lot of content to build it from. And it was exceptionally helpful because for every team that presented what their app looked like, we picked the best bits out of it and we created our intervention, which we called Cyber Savvy. So there was an app. We built an app as part of this, but we also used content to support activities and resources for parents. There was content for curriculum related to sexting, and there was whole school content that we're able to build to help influence policy and so on, obviously specifically focusing on sexting behaviour amongst young people. The app was built, and again, my colleague Beck Nugent, I must acknowledge her work in doing this. This symbol, if you were in the App Store, this is the symbol that you would find within there. It is available, again, probably only limited to Australia, so I apologise to be tantalising you with this, but I can at least show you the content that we have as part of this. But what the app does is it in the moment when a young person is uploading an image, in 10 seconds immediately following them pressing the button to say that they want to upload this image, they get a message. And it's a very simple message that they have said they would say to themselves after they've sent an image and going, oh my goodness, should I have sent that? So what we've tried to do is to capture what young people say to themselves when they realise they probably shouldn't have sent an image. And we've done that in a very humorous way to help young people to just pause. So if you were using this app right now and you were inside the app, it would look something like this. You would load your photos. In fact, every image you take would go into the app. And then as you decided to maybe upload it to Facebook, immediately after you click to send it to Facebook, it would be held in the phone. So it hasn't gone yet. And you would hear a 10-second message. And as I said, these messages were designed by young people about what they would say to themselves, and mostly funny, and they would be in a video format. And after that 10 seconds has passed, because young people said 10 seconds is all you've got, they then ask again, are you sure you want to send this image? And then they can click, and once they've clicked, it's gone. So it's creating a moment for them to just think for a little bit longer why it is that they would be sending this image. In addition to that, the app also addressed another challenge that young people said they had, where they are being asked to send an image that they don't really want to send. So maybe a boyfriend or a girlfriend is saying, could you please send me a nude or a semi-nude picture of yourself? And they don't know how to handle that. There is a whole a variety of other things they could send in that moment. So it's called Send This Instead. And a colleague who developed this, the website is at the bottom of my screen just here. A whole series of things. Yes, that's my favourite. I can't send you nude photos, but I'll forward this to my dad.
That reply.
And I think this is really important, because when somebody is stressed about sending something back that's funny can really neutralise the situation, and just having this library of ideas there are ones that can be very helpful. So these, again, suggested by young people and built into this app. It also can track images as part of this, and all of these features were designed by young people, and the app was ultimately even built by slightly older people in a university environment who did an extraordinary job. So I have two slides to finish. I've talked a lot tonight about the importance of authentic student voice in all that we do. I've encouraged you to think about all the stages that young people could contribute their voice to build things, create things that are relevant and authentic. I've also encouraged everyone to think about those leadership roles and the ways that young people could be engaging. And I'd like to argue, as I close here, that student voice can really drive positive cyber behaviour. We could drive positive cyber behaviour by just getting rid of children in schools that are behaving badly. Forgive my joke here, but I'll send you $9,000 to send your child to another school in a desperate attempt to tackle bullying. Or we could use young people to co-create, to test, to implement, to advocate for this behaviour. They're trusted messengers in a school environment. Other young people trust them. They can influence social norms, and they can influence normative expectations. So they can influence how many people think that this is really important, and also how many people expect these kinds of behaviours will be occurring. They can nudge. Children don't want to be told, they don't want to be banned. It becomes more exciting for them. But gentle nudges from peers can be incredibly effective in encouraging really positive behaviour and establishing these social norms that I talked about before. There are many opportunities for self-directed learning in areas that I think that young people can provide terrific opportunities to really drive their own learning and growth in this area. And I'd also argue that co-designing solutions that are identified and defined means that we can understand what are the relevant problems that young people are concerned about, and in turn involve them in relevant solutions as we go forward. So the outcomes of this work, my final slide, I promise, is that we need to make sure that we build high self-efficacy in our cyber leaders. We need to make them feel like they really make a difference, and they do. Research certainly shows that. This paper that I'm citing down the bottom here is an example of a summary of the work that we did with our cyber leaders. It gives them a high sense of agency. It helps them really feel like they belong, and it builds their competence. And if you recognise those three qualities, largely fall into what we might call self-determination theory, incredibly important in terms of young people's growth. It builds authentic leadership opportunities within their school environment, where young people feel like they're really valued and works well, but it must be backed by school for support. So I'll stop there and thank everyone for listening.
Well, thank you. This was really a high-opening presentation, and we have to thank you for it. One of the questions that I would like to ask you, Donna, is we need input not only from students that feel that are leaders, because sometimes the students that feel that are leaders can be, for instance, bullies. And we need to have a representative sample of the students, minorities, children, for instance, who have sexual differences or different orientations, students that are, students that are obese, students that have some speech impediment, students, that don't fit the group usually. And how do you choose a group of students for this work that is representative of all those potential issues that the school might be confronted with?
It's a great question, Tito, and there are two ways that we've done it, and again, they might not be methods that would work for those people who are listening. In all of the studies that I cited here and others that we engage in, we have always surveyed the wider school of students to make sure that every young person gets to have a voice. So not just those who are identified as leaders, and that we provide an opportunity for them to have an anonymous voice, but also if they would like to put their name to it, they can. And at the close of the survey, we always ask if they would like to take on a leadership role that might be a leadership role where they work through technology, or a leadership role where they might take a more physical presence within the school environment. And I think that, at least for us, that was helpful, so that we were being sure, as you said, to be much more representative of all of those students from whom we need to be listening.
Okay.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
I think by your presentation, I had some questions here to ask you, but as far you were talking about, and in your whole presentation, it was much clear for me the importance to involve young people as co-researchers and co-designers intervention. And in the last slides you show, it was clear also the principal benefits for young people of being involved in this process for themselves, not only for the community, but for themselves. But I wonder, in your point of view, what do you think are the barriers to involving young people in this approach? And in your case, in all these projects you have, what were the principal barriers you confronted?
Yes, I think I'll divide the barriers into two parts. There's the barriers most of our research was delivered through schools, so forgive me for anyone who's listening who is not in a school context. But the first major barrier was that schools didn't, at the time, certainly with some of these projects, didn't think that this was enough of an issue to need to engage young people's voices. So the biggest barrier was to bring the school along with the process. So you might recall that the very first summit, we had a room full of over 100 young people, and there were only young people in the room and very few, 3 adults. In another room, we had all of the teachers who represented those schools, and in another room, we had the parents of the children and young people who were in the main summit hall. And our barrier was that when the teachers went back to the school, there was only one teacher who attended that summit, and it was their job to then try and convince and motivate the rest of the school. So we needed to work much harder at sharing the data that we had collected from the school. So one way we got around that later in other studies was taking the data that we had from young people and really actively sharing the school's data with the school staff. And the teachers were much more motivated because they could see that they were looking at their own students' data, and that helped them realise the importance of engaging. And I think the other major barrier from the students' perspective was choosing the right students to be involved as the leaders, but also making sure that we were collecting the greater voice within the school environment. Where we selected, or where the school selected, we didn't choose the students. The schools selected the students and sent them to us. Where the schools didn't send the students that the rest of the students wanted, they had many more difficulties when they went back into the school environment. It really needed to be a peer selection process to nominate those student leaders. You had suggested, Tito, for example, that sometimes emerging leaders in the school are students who bully. So we were able to vet out those students from those that were selected, because we had data that we were collecting on those students, but also data that the school had provided. So we could take those students out for a start, because immediately they were no longer trusted messengers. But those two things were most critical.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you so much. Tito?
Okay. I don't know if there is anyone in the audience that wants to ask Donna a question. If not, Sonia, if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask them.
No, I don't. That was the major one for me.
Okay.
But thank you so much,
Donna, thank you very much. I'll ask you for one final piece of advice or recommendation or a tip that you want, that you want to leave with us. But give me a minute or two and I'll come back to you, because I have to present the sessions that we'll be having until the end of the month. It will take me just a minute. Tomorrow we'll have Philippe Cohen, founder of Respect Zone in France. He'll be talking with us on how to make your online space respect by design. He'll be talking on how to face and tackle hate speech online. Philippe is part of an organization, of a group set up by the French government to monitor hate speech online. And since the Portuguese government is planning also on setting up a similar group, I'm looking forward to hear from Philippe on that sense. Then on Friday, we'll have Teresa Paula Marques from Portugal, and she'll be talking also about hate on social media, the emotional impact and how to deal with haters and how to prevent being a victim and how to deal with haters online. She has just written a book that will be published this year, and she'll be talking on this subject, and she'll be talking also about her personal experience, because she was a victim of online hate as well, because of her wide media exposure. And then on the 31st, Saturday evening, we'll end this summit with me, Sonia, and Luis, where we'll look at the 35 sessions that we hold during this month, and we'll see also what we'll be doing in the future. So back to you, Donna. Thank you once again for having accepted our invitation and giving us your time. And for my apologies for forcing you to have dinner running. And please leave us with your final recommendation.
Thanks very much, Tito and Sonia. It really is my pleasure. My final recommendation goes back to the title for my session, which is "If It's About Me, Why Do It Without Me?" And I think it's that constant reflection that we need to be having as we do any of the work that we do, that we must involve the users and the consumers of or whatever we're producing, to make sure that we have the best and most relevant outcome on the most relevant issues for that group. Thanks, Tito, and thanks, Sonia. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Donna. It was a great pleasure
Thank you
to
so
be
much.
here and learning with
Yes.
you. It was really a eye-opening presentation, and from which we have learned a lot, and I'm sure we'll learn even more by following and looking at the Telethon Kids Institute website, where there will be more information. And a good evening to you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
See you soon, Donna. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you to everybody that was following us. As a reminder, we'll be back tomorrow evening. There won't be an evening session today. And we'll have to thank also to Google for sponsoring this event, and also to .pt, the Portuguese association that manages domain name services. Our regards also to Cid Claysosa, who has joined us from Chile. And so don't forget, tomorrow we'll be back at 9:30 with Philippe Cohen from Respect Zone. See you tomorrow then.